Okay, so what the laser cutter is looking for, you guys, it is looking for a specific line color. Okay, it is going to identify the colors of lines in terms of what to do with each one. So if I want something engraved and I want something cut, I'm going to need at least two different line types, right? And I can set, let's say, engraved to blue and tell the laser to only use 10% power. And it's just going to put a little light mark across the top, which is really convenient. You'll use that. We won't use it necessarily on this project, but it is an excellent tool to have to indicate things on a topo model, streets, sidewalks, things like that. It's also an excellent thing to use when you're stacking, like on this project. Although, let's just get to the stacking project, but if you have something to stack, help them line up. So, for instance, if I'm going to do a topography model, I might do odds and evens in terms of topo lines, where I engrave the odds, cut the evens, and then run a second pass where I cut the odds and engrave the evens, and then I can build a full topography model out of 2 pieces of chipboard or 2 pieces of cardboard, rather than a stack of 40. Right now, it's going to build it up hollow, but it's a really efficient way to build models. You'll see a lot of those floating around the architecture building. It's a more efficient way. It's faster, and you use a lot less material. That said, what we're really starting with is just cut lines. So if you think about Revit as a system, so if I come to annotate, typically we are going to want to use annotation detail lines. Okay? If I draw a default line, like most everything in Revit, the default lines are going to be black lines. Okay? All of my symbols, all of my titles, all of those things are going to be black lines. So if I use black as my primary color, it's going to want to cut all of that stuff, right? So we want to use a different color, and we want to use a specific line type, right? So to do that, we are going to go to the Manage tab on the ribbon. Next, we are going to go to Additional Settings, this wrench right here, and we are going to go to Line Styles. Click. Under Line Styles, if you click the plus right here on Lines, you're going to see all of the default line styles loaded up. Okay, everything from area to demo. I kind of appreciate Revit's take on line weights. There are 3, medium, thin, and wide. Really, that's about all that you need in doing architectural drawings. If you use those 3 well, that will serve you well, okay? So what we're going to do is we are going to make a new subcategory. So it's right here at the bottom of this menu, the bottom right. We're going to click New. And because it's a laser cut line, I would name it Laser Cut. And say OK. And that is going to add that to your list of line types. Your line weight, you want to leave that as 1, but I do want to show you what that's doing. If you click on that 1, you're going to get a drop-down list, and you're going to see 1 to 16. That is the number of line weight variables that you can do. So if you need a ridiculously wide line, you can set that to 16. If you need a thin line, the thinnest line that it draws, you're going to set that to 1. Also, if you need an uber thin line, one of the things that I've learned in Revit, this is a really good cheat, change the color from black to gray. And that works. It kind of does the same thing. It makes it a super, super thin line, just in terms of how it prints out. So that's another thing to remember. And that setup is line color, which is the next thing that we're going to do. So click on where it says black. The laser cutter, our laser cutter is looking for these specific sets of colors: red, yellow, green, blue, cyan, blue, magenta. It is looking exactly for those colors. We kind of run it. It doesn't really matter, but just for the sake of consistency and getting help in the I/O, typically we like to use green for cut, blue for engrave. Okay, it's not a rule, but it's helpful. You know, if you're working with a fifth year or anybody else that's running the I/O, if you'll set things up that way, it will help. Yeah. Some people set it up that way. It doesn't really matter what color it is. This is simply our sort of own internal standards. So if you'll follow green for cut and blue for engrave, that kind of sets a pattern, but you don't have to follow it. Okay. We'll go over the exact laser interface, how Revit actually does an interface with the universal laser on Monday. Okay, looking at those specifics. But if you'll use green, the other reason, because I'm the one that set the standard up, green pops off the screen really well. It's easy to see the green lines on top of the black lines when you're tracing things out. Okay, so it's a little bit easier to find them than the red lines or the blue lines. Okay, it's just easier on the eyes. So we're going to set this to green. The next thing to note in terms of these is we want to use a solid line, but I do want to call out for you guys, point out to you rather, all of these other line types that you do have access to. Okay, so any of these, a hidden line, dash lines, overhead, triple dash. I don't even know what a triple dash is, but it sounds exciting. Okay, so there's a lot of options that you can do with that as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So now when I go back to architecture, or not back to architecture, I'm sorry, annotate, detail lines, if I look at this drop-down list under line styles, I will have the new line style that I just created, laser cut. If I select laser cut as I start drawing, and by drawing I'm simply doing left clicks, you will see I'm now drawing with a very thin green colored line. Okay, if I were to do file print and send this to the laser cutter, I would be able to have the laser ignore these black lines and cut the green lines. And that's exactly what we're looking for. We're looking for something that is setting this up in such a way that we only cut certain lines. So when that's coming to a project, so this is sort of what I want you guys to see in terms of the how-to. When I'm setting up a project for this, there's a few more specific things that I need to be able to do. So right now, I have, that's the light. So this is what we're looking for in terms of your massing model. Okay, so that's all modeled out of custom components. Just really, really simple extrusions and a couple of voids. If I look at that in my west elevation, that is my cut sheet right there. All those green lines are going to be cut. To build these, to draw these lines, this was my process. So let's say that I wanted to start with something that was the exterior profile of this, okay? So if you'll notice, the first thing is I'm prepping this for some graphics to display. I've got shadows turned on, and then I also have my line weights turned on. So I'm going to do a couple of quick things in this. I'm going to turn my shadows back off. Okay, no shadows. Right up here is something to toggle line weights on and off. Okay, line weights are going to adjust based on the scale in Revit. Okay, remember, we're always working one-to-one, right? So if I change the scale down here, nothing is going to change in terms of the size of my object. But there are at least two things that are always going to change that are very noticeable. If I have text, it's going to keep the point size the same based on my scale factor here. So in other words, at a 16th inch, the text is going to be twice the size as it is at an 1/8 inch. So it's going to make that adjustment for you automatically. The other thing that's going to adjust are the thicknesses of the line. So if I set this to 12 inches, you're going to see immediately that changes the line weights. If I change this to, like, let's say a 16th, it's going to become unlegible. Right? The thickness of the lines at that given scale, it's not going to draw correctly. Okay? Knowing that, well, first of all, this is a smaller detail, so I should be working in that 1.5 inch range anyway. But when I do want to be able to see with a little bit more clarity, there's this little button right here that I often have turned on when I'm working, which is called thin lines. And that takes everything down to its thinnest line weight represented on screen. So it doesn't matter how far I zoom in or how far I zoom out, it's going to keep those lines super thin for me. Okay, so I've got shadows turned off. You really never want to work with shadows on anyway. That just slows your computer down. I'm going to go to Annotate, Detail Lines. I've got Laser. I should have named that Laser Cut. I've got Laser selected. And I'm simply going to come in and trace around this object. You know, so your order of operations on this, you need to have your detail blocked out with the components first, and then that's going to act as a guide for your cut lines. Okay, I really don't want you to do the cut lines first and then try and model something for this project. Okay, tracing around, tracing. Still tracing, almost done. So, and if you do notice, I'm continuing to use InSnap all the way around, and I've got that, okay? The tricky thing is how to move these off of this if I want to see them displayed neatly in a row, okay? Because the next piece that I come around might be something like going detail lines and laser, and maybe I want to trace this detail, but I need all of those sort of pulled apart and separated. Okay, so there's two ways that I can do this really, really quickly to move things around. And you'll use both methods depending on what you want to do. And you know, if I'm working on an elevation of a building rather than a detail but a full elevation, one method might work better. Or if I'm working on a certain kind of pattern, different methods are going to work differently. This, because all of those lines were connected, head to tail, right? A really quick method for me to grab this and move it is I can take my cursor and move it over one of those lines. And Revit does this really well. It tells you what it's going to select before you left click to select it, right? So my cursor comes close to that line and it's going to highlight. What I can do in Revit is I can say I don't want only that line, but I can use the tab key to toggle through my selection options. So if I have a series of lines connected head to tail, I can say, oh, yeah, actually what I want are all of those lines, okay? And so they're not selected yet, but they're highlighted so that I can. I can hit tab again, and it's going to select the model. I can hit tab again, and it's going to go back to a single line. So at that location, for the cursor, I have three different things that I can select. The single line, all the lines, or the model. In this case, I want all of the lines. So I'm going to click tab. I'm going to left click, and then it's going to default to move, or I can select the move tool, and I can simply move that to a new location. So now all of those lines have moved away from what I originally traced them around. Cool? So that's using the tab key. Super, super important technique that you will be using over and over again in Revit. Do not do this. Most students, when they start using the tab key, they want to hold it down like this. And see the chaos that ensues? Don't do that. These are single clicks of the tab key to toggle through your different options. Okay? The next method, and this one is more relevant, like if I'm working on a facade and have the entire wall drawn out and then a series of windows or something on the inside, those are going to be a series of lines not connected head to tail. So the tab button isn't going to select all of those lines for me. Right? So let's undo this really quick. And let's say I've got that perimeter and I have this outline. So I need both this line all together, but then I also need this one all together, right? Not so easy to do. It wants to pick either or. And you could probably shift, cross your eyes, hit control, and do something else secret handshake wise to make that happen. But there's an easier way to do it than that, and that is I can select one line, And then right down here with my sunglasses, okay, this is your temporary hide and isolate. So it's changing the visibility of the screen. Right down here at temporary hide and isolate, I can say isolate category. So your category is line work. It temporarily hides everything but my line work. So given that, I can now highlight all of those, move them over, reset my view, and I've accomplished pretty much the exact same thing, right? So those two methods, that tab, select all, or isolate, are how you trace things, move them away from your model, and get them organized all onto one cut sheet, okay? So the next thing that you need to do, the laser cutter itself is a 18-inch by 24-inch bed, right? You've all seen it in the IO. What we need to make that happen is we need an 18-inch by 24-inch sheet inside of Revit. On the storage file, there is a folder called IO Resources that will have an 18 by 24-inch sheet in it, but I want to show you how to make your own. Process is pretty simple. You're going to go to File, New, Title Block, because essentially what we're doing is we're creating a view inside of Revit to print from. So it's New Title Block. Fortunately enough for us, there is an 18-inch by 24-inch already. It's Arc C is the size. So I'm just going to say open to that. So this is where if I'm in an office, I can bring in graphics, title blocks, all of that kind of stuff. No different than doing a book layout. This would be what page content I want to happen on every single page that I print out, right? So your office name, the project name, all that stuff I can start setting up here in this view. For something like this, we don't want anything on there. We just want an 18-inch by 24-inch parameter, right? So from here, I'm just going to go File, Save As, because I simply want an 18-inch by 24-inch page. I'm just going to write this to my desktop because it's something I need all the time. And I'm just going to call it Laser 18 by 24, and it's going to be a .rfa, which stands for Revit Family. I'm going to click Save. I'm overwriting the one that I have because why not? And then I'm going to go back to my page right here. Let's go back to this one right here, the one where I already have all these cut lines put together. Let's go ahead. I'm going to delete this so that I can walk you through all of it. Right down here, these underneath sheets, and there are multiple ways to print, but if I want to print something to scale and want to be able to have a decent preview of what's going to happen, I typically need to lay out a sheet, okay? So right here with sheets, oh dear, wrong thing. Let's go to this one. Right here, underneath sheets, I'm going to right-click and go to New Sheet, and I am going to load from my desktop the Laser 18 by 24, and it's going to show up. I'm going to overwrite the existing version. I've already done it. It's going to show up right here in my list of title blocks. Laser 18 by 24, and I'm going to click OK. So now if I look at my sheets, I have A102 unnamed. Okay, and I don't really need to worry about that when you're in an office and you're printing out 500 sheets. That's when your naming convention really becomes important. I haven't really seen any student projects go past 1 or 2 sheets. So for right now, I wouldn't worry about it. When you go to an office, look very closely at what their naming conventions are and follow it. Okay, to grab my line work right here. So I did all of these in my west elevation. On my sheet, all that I have to do is drag and left click to place that line work. Okay, so right now I know that that was 1.5 inches equals 1 foot scale. If I go back to my west elevation and change the scale to 3 inches and then go back into my sheet, you can see it's now doubled the size of all of those in relation to this 18-inch by 24-inch view. So if I measure here, That is 24 by 18. And I can measure one of these pieces and see that it is an inch and change by 5 inches and change. Whereas if I go to the west elevation and measure, I'm actually 1'9" by 7 inches. Okay, so when I place those things in the sheet, it's applying the scale value, setting the size so that it's actually printing out, or in this case, cutting at the scale that I need it to. Cool, so it's a lot of steps to make this stuff happen. After doing this about 2 or 3 times, trust me, it becomes second nature, and it makes sense. But you have to have a fairly robust system to make this work for you, especially when you get to an office and production is at a premium, right? I mean, you can't afford to go back in and change the line weight on everything and change the size of the text on everything. I mean, this is set up to automate those tasks for you and make them happen. So, given all